Good evening and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Sanket Upadhyay. One debate and an exclusive interview lined up over the next 1 hour. First up, the big political announcement and then an even bigger U-turn. What explains this Rajinikanth flip-flop more than what meets the eye, you wonder? We'll put that to a discussion where a panel of experts are going to decode this sudden U-turn, the flip. Also on the show, from the virus to the vaccine via a new strain, what is the thought process of the government and the action plan for 2021? We'll be getting you an exclusive conversation with a man who knows all, has been part of all the planning in the government, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan. But first, let's tell you what Rajinikanth has said. He wrote a letter today in which he said, with extreme sadness, I say that I cannot enter politics. I alone know the pain I went through while announcing this decision. This decision of mine will disappoint my fans and people, but please forgive me. I will serve the people without entering electoral politics. But the big question is, and then he talks about his hospitalization, where he said it was like a warning from God. My campaign will impact health amid the pandemic, and I thank office bearers for working with me. So, if health was the reason, then he could have deferred his decision further. To say that he will not join politics is a near certain U-turn. Why has this happened? Let's take a look at this presentation.
Citing a warning from God, superstar Rajinikanth is opting out of electoral politics 2 days before he was expected to make an announcement 5 months before state elections. I regret to say that I am unable to start a party and come to politics. Saying this is giving me pain that only I can know. Rajinikanth has blamed his health amid the COVID pandemic for what he called a painful decision. In a 3-page statement, Rajinikanth referred to his recent hospitalization at Hyderabad and said, I see all this as a warning given by God. This at a time when a new corona variant is on its way as a second wave. Pointing out that BP fluctuations will adversely affect his kidney transplant, he said, even with vaccine, I may not be able to cope as I take immunosuppressants. Rajini's friend, fellow actor Kamal Haasan, who launched his political party, says he is disappointed.
பிரச்சார பயணம் முடிந்த பிறகு சென்னை சென்றவுடன் அவரை மீண்டும் சந்திப்பேன். என்னை பொறுத்தவரை அவர்கள் ரசிகர்களின் மனோநிலை தான் எனக்கும். சற்றே ஏமாற்றம் இருந்தாலும் அவருடைய ஆரோக்கியம் எனக்கே மிக முக்கியமான ஒரு விஷயம்.
The AIADMK that many said may lose votes to Rajinikanth if he made his political debut, hopes Rajini will back the ruling party as he wants MGR type rule.
அவருடைய உடல்நிலை அவர் முக்கியது. அவர் சொல்லியிருக்கிறாரு வரவேற்கத்தக்கது. அவருடைய உடல்நிலையை கருதி அவர் சொல்றாரு. அதைத்தான் நம்ம பார்க்கணும். இதில் அரசியல் பண்ண வேண்டிய அவசியம் இல்லை.
Rajinikanth has once again invoked God to say God has won and therefore he's quitting. Like in the 1997 film Arunachalam, his character says, Aandavan solran Arunachalam mudikiran, meaning God dictates and Arunachalam gets it done. Rajinikanth has for the last 25 years played Kabhi Haan, Kabhi Na. A few fans and admirers disappointed that he has not done an MGR or an NTR, but he manages to retain his aura as he is not rejected by the people. With camera person Nagraju, Uma Sudhir, NDTV.
So we decided that instead of getting the usual political panel where you have political representatives talking about it, let us get the experts to analyze what they think about this U-turn. Is it just about his health or something else? I have with me Mr. N. Ram, Director of the Hindu Publishing Group, who was with us yesterday and did mention, Mr. Ram, I hope you recall, you spoke about Rajinikanth and what impact is he going to have, and look what happened. He took a decision today. So, we'll come to you in just a short moment. Dhanya Rajendran, Editor-in-Chief of the News Minute, is also with us. We also have Kasturi, actress as well as a political commentator. Naresh Arora, Director and Co-founder, Design Boxed, and a political strategist. And N. Umashankar, lawyer and admirer of Talaivar superstar Rajinikanth. Thank you so much for joining us, all of you all. Mr. Ram, how do you analyze this near certain U-turn by Rajinikanth? What does this mean?
I'm not surprised. I would like to remind you that I expressed doubt about what was ahead for him. And I'm not surprised by this decision because, as I understand it, I've also had a conversation with him in the company of Cho Ramaswamy several years ago. He has been very reluctant, and something happened to push him into that decision, much against his wishes. There was pressure from within, from the ranks, and also external pressure. We don't want to speculate too much about it. But I'm not surprised because, and I think it is a sound and responsible decision. He should not have gone ahead on December 3rd, much against his wishes, I believe. There were conflicting pulls. But having come to this position, I don't know. I mean, I can only go by the press release, released by Apollo Hospitals and whatever he has said or had leaked about his health condition, but it is genuine. He's had a kidney transplant. His immunity system is weak, and this is a time of COVID, so I think it makes sense. There are other factors, yes. I think the lack of experience, lack of an organization which can win votes, and also resources. Because he's not in a position, personally or through his fan association, to raise the kind of money that will be spent, has been spent in the past in Tamil Nadu elections and will be spent, probably on a bigger scale than before. Who's going to fund it? He's not able to do it. That may be a factor. But I think the real reason is what he has said, the health condition. I'm not surprised. And I would consider this as sound. There's a statement, there's a sentence in that the Tamil letter that's been released where he says that if you have to go further and meet thousands and even lakhs of people during the campaign, and something happens to his health, people who have sailed with him would be in a hot spot. It would be a terrible thing. So, in other words, reduce the damage now, and he's apologized. I think on the whole, it's a sound decision, it's a responsible decision, and I would like to commend Rajinikanth, whom I know, for taking this step on this. And he said it gave him great pain. It must have. Yeah. Because, to do a U-turn at this stage is not very pleasant, and all kinds of inferences will be drawn.
Correct.
I don't think we should speculate on his health, whether it was really what the press release said or he said or...
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, who would like to pretend to be in a hospital? It's very clear that obviously there was something wrong with his health. But was that the only reason dictating his decision to not enter politics? I think that is the crucial point. Mr. Ram makes a very interesting point on resources. Dhanya Rajendran, I want to come to you now as someone who's followed Tamil Nadu politics closely, followed the phenomenon called Rajinikanth closely. Was he a phenomenon in politics overhyped? Because, politics is a different ball game altogether. You need to be a totally different sort of an animal. And for Rajinikanth to say that he will get in spirituality in politics, was it a bit too utopian?
Well, I think there is absolutely no two ways about it when we say that Rajinikanth is a man loved by lakhs and lakhs of people, by millions of people in Tamil Nadu, and that he has fans, that he has a huge fan following. But I think the media and even, of course, Rajinikanth's people themselves did exaggerate the kind of impact that he would have if he entered politics. I mean, to simplify that people of Tamil Nadu would all vote for an actor, for a popular actor, I think it's not right. So Rajinikanth does realize that, in fact, when he met the Makkal Mandram people a few days ago, one of the concerns that he had told them is that if we do take this plunge, will we be successful? We should not have a failure in future. So that was one of his concerns. So I think while his health and the risk that the pandemic poses, if he has to go out and campaign, that is a genuine concern for him and his family. That has been accelerated by other factors, like the fact that he is a reluctant politician, as Mr. Ram clearly said, and that he does not have too many resources, and the time is limited for him. Now, his reluctance is very visible in the fact that he made the first announcement in December 2017 that he would start a party. Yeah. Now, from 2017 to, let's say, March this year, there was no pandemic. So why did Rajinikanth not go ahead and do something about his political party? He did not. Yeah. Clearly because he's a reluctant politician. Now, how much ever the Rajni Makkal Mandram says that we were actually looking at booth level functioning and making booth level managers, etc. He did not even announce a political party.
Yeah.
Then the pandemic starts in March this year, and of course all his plans go haywire. So while his health is a genuine concern, I do think there are other political reasons also why he decided to back up.
Correct. And Mr. Naresh Arora, I saw a tweet of yours where you said that you're not surprised by Rajnikant's decision to ditch political ambitions, and you feel that this goes beyond health. Would you like to tell our panelists and all our audience what is your assessment?
Yeah, Sanket, my tweet was based on the findings that our team had when they went on the ground a couple of months back for a particular cause, in which, of course, we were trying to assess that how much impact Mr. Rajnikant would make if he was to make a political party at some stage and take a plunge into electoral politics. And to our utter surprise at that time, we found out that it was not even 2% voters that were in favor of Rajnikant coming into politics. And the most surprising part, as I have highlighted in my tweet also, it was from the youngsters from 18 to 25. I completely concur with Mr. Ram and the other panelists on your show that Rajnikant's flip-flops have been the biggest reason for people not wanting or people not relying on his political entry. In fact, I would say that it is a good political call, whosoever has advised him to do so, for whatever reasons, that he has not taken the plunge, considering that the good work he's done in his on-screen years of almost 2 decades or 3 decades. But the findings on the survey on the ground were, even in the sections which were middle-age group sections, as we divide in our terminologies, that people were completely averse to the idea of Rajnikant taking a plunge into politics. And all these comparisons with MGR were also highlighted in that survey, I would say.
Naresh, there are two things. One is that I'm Kasturi, one is that I'm popular as an actor, right? And I have a great and massive fan following. And the other is that fan base accepts me as their leader, political leader, and then I deliver on those promises. These are two totally different things. Do you think that's where the problem was, which took an awfully long gestation period for a Rajnikant to eventually decide, and then after that take a U-turn, perhaps to cut losses?
First off,
is it for me, Sanket?
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Naresh. This is for Kasturi.
First off, I have to say something about the phrase that's being bandied about, a reluctant politician. I have been in touch with Mr. Rajnikant in the last 3 years, and it wasn't I who went and asked him about his political plans. It was he who chooses whom he has to talk to. And if he was a reluctant politician 3 years ago, he hid it very well. If he was a reluctant politician last year, I must say he was very convincing otherwise, to the contrary. So I think this year has definitely had a huge impact on several issues. Number one, his health. It's a genuine problem.
Yeah.
It's not a cop-out. He is really not well. He has not had, he has been on a transplant kidney even before he announced his regular intention to get into politics. So I think it got his health deteriorated, number one. And number two, I think he wasn't very happy with how he had to, as Mr. Naresh Arora said, resources meant that you have to go in for alliance. In Tamil Nadu, I think he realized that you cannot go it alone. You cannot, this is not the time for a tsunami wave of a single personality coming and changing the entire politics. Alliance politics is a compulsion in Tamil Nadu today. And I think that's where a lot of this idealistic expectations were not met. I think, all the stuff that he wanted to come to politics for, like changing the system, cleaning the system. Yeah. How is he going to do that if he has to be partners with other parties?
With what he wants to change?
Yeah.
How will he do that if he has to partner with all the stuff that he wants to change?
Exactly.
So
I think
it's
it
his
was
idealism.
The contradiction just got bigger and bigger, and at some point, the reluctance, I would only say he was reluctant to shoulder the responsibility of failing on his promises, not failing in a poll. I don't think that would have mattered much to him.
Are you sure? Are you sure? Because, you know, many would turn around and say that in the 2021 elections, Mr. Umashankar, I want to come to you. In the 2021 elections, had he announced his political entry, and obviously this is too early. This is too early for a brand new political party to be able to make an impact, and the result could have been disastrous. And that is why, quote unquote, this was a cop-out, not taking away from his health. Mr. Umashankar. Can you hear me, Mr. Umashankar?
No, I couldn't really fully hear you.
Yeah, Mr. Umashankar, my question is, yes, I can hear you. My question is that did Rajnikant or his political parties or members feel that they will not be able to sustain an organization in the build-up to an assembly election, and thus will fail miserably? Politics is a different ball game altogether.
No, I now get your point. No, it is not that way. He never had such apprehensions. No, he never had such apprehensions. Such kinds of apprehensions he never had. He had been confident all along. It is not that he was in reluctance. In 2017, when he made the announcement, he made 3 points. He stuck to those 3 points all through. Only on 12th March 2020, he made the announcement that he wanted to have the party and the ruler, that is the CM, separately. And then he said that he needed a total change in the political setup. He was not just looking for the change in the government, change in the CM seat. He was looking for a change in the political system. He impressed upon it, and he said that let his followers go and work for it. When they complete the work, he would come and take over. And since then, the pandemic has struck. That has had a terrible impact on him also, in that the deaths of persons like Anbalagan, SP Balasubramaniam, Vasant Kumar have had some impact on him. He has been advised by his doctors.
No, there is a genuine health concern. Nobody takes away from that. But to say that a pandemic derailed the plan, you know, you don't do politics like this, Mr. Umashankar.
No. Let me complete. See, in the past 3 years, the Rajani Makkal Mandram now has about more than 25 lakh members by itself, and apart from that, for the 67,000 polling booths, we have appointed the booth committee members.
What about the findings of Mr. Arora? What about his findings?
I don't think those findings are acceptable. I do not know the reliability of them. We do have our videos taken from the ground level. Very many ladies have given videos saying that they want to vote Rajnikant when he comes to politics.
Very quickly, a right to reply.
Those videos had been taken. I will tell you, based on those videos only, the 3rd December announcement was made by him. We have our own groundwork done, and those groundworks do say that he has a groundswell of support. It is wrong to say that he was reluctant. It is also wrong to say that he had no support, just about 2%, because the membership alone is covering about 3% of the votes.
Okay, Naresh, would you like to respond? One moment. A quick right to reply to Naresh and then Mr. Ram.
Yes, Sanket. Our survey was spread across all the Vidhan Sabha constituencies or the assembly constituencies of Tamil Nadu, and the sample size per constituency was around 500. And the percentage points which we have drawn conclusion from are spread across the state. Yes, your other panelist is right in one part that women above 45 have some kind of traction for Mr. Rajnikant. But across other sections, the traction was not there. The findings were, the adjectives which people used were that the person is not consistent. His understanding of Tamil Nadu politics is not known to us. In fact, they had some things which they were not able to, wanting to rely on. And the third part was that people asked that it was since 2017 that the party had been announced. He was not able to put any kind of structure in place which speaks of his organizational capabilities. This is not what I am saying. This is what the sample size and the data that we have from the ground. I am making my observations based on those conclusions. Thirdly, one more thing which they highlighted was about that Mr. Rajnikant in 2020, this announcement of entering into politics has been since 1996, when he first gave a statement against the then Chief Minister, or probably about to happen Chief Minister, Jayalalitha. So, sorry, she was the Chief Minister and she lost after that. But since then, he has been coming and going, not making a consistent stand. And people were not at all wanting to give him a chance as a Chief Minister. They appreciate his movies, they appreciate his acting skills, but about organizational skills, political skills, people were not very confident about.
Okay. So that's a survey, and of course, Mr. Uma Shankar and many others have their right to reject this survey also. But you have presented your case well, Mr. N. Ram. Very quickly, I'm coming back to you now. This 1996 comment, I'm sure you would be able to tell us a little more about what he said. He says even God cannot save Tamil Nadu if Jayalalitha comes back to power. It's a very famous comment. Everybody knows about it. Now the point is that there is no Jayalalitha, there is no Karunanidhi, and ideally it would have been a perfect ground, a perfect political opportunity for his launch. Apart from the health, and also given the fact that he is a big phenomenon, Mr. Ram, what should be the next step? What exactly should a Rajnikant do with his fan club, with his support base?
I think he should make it clear that he is not affiliated to any camp. If he wishes, he can speak out on issues. He's already said that he wants to pursue clean or spiritual politics, but also secular politics. I hope he sticks to that, because Tamil Nadu doesn't need toxic communalism as a political mobilization strategy, whatever other problems we've had in Tamil Nadu. So I think he should stay the course. I also believe, Sanket, that what you mentioned was a real factor, and I'd rather go by Mr. Arora's findings and data, because he laid them out very clearly. I had the same view. Those also are observations. Vijaykanth, for an actor who had no previous political experience or affiliation, the maximum score in Tamil Nadu was 8% when they contested everything. That was Vijaykanth. And it is very doubtful, I think, that Rajnikant and all his followers would have achieved that in this situation. His time had passed. There was a real health concern which may have been the decisive factor. But who can deny that he was pushed? There was tremendous pressure from inside, from outside, saying there's space and all that. But I think finally there was a reality check. And that is what I commend. Somebody who had the guts to completely reverse everything he had said and said in the final analysis, I can't do it. And I think that's how I'd read it. And he was pushed to this. One other minor matter is people like Arjuna Murthy, who was the head of the BJP's intellectual cell. He came over to Rajnikant. Will he go back?
Yeah, that's a very big question. Dhanya Rajendran, you're smiling. See, the point is, I read it in the Hindu newspaper just now on the Twitter handle of the Hindu, and it says that the BJP state president has said that Rajnikant, in national interest, must come out and support the BJP. So in that context, do you think that now people will want him to align? Now that he is not a political force, but yet align?
Sanket, if you're asking the question to me, it's not just the BJP, but the AIDMK. In fact, right from afternoon when this announcement came from Rajnikant, the reactions from every AIDMK leader has been that Rajnikant should now come out and support the AIDMK. The BJP is, of course, parroting that. And Mr. Gurumurthy, who has come on almost every channel saying that he has been advising Rajnikant, also tweeted saying that there will be a 1996-like scenario where Rajnikant will endorse. Now, I don't think there is going to be a 1996-like scenario, even if Rajnikant does decide to endorse the AIADMK or the BJP, there would be a section of voters who would have voted for Rajinikanth. From that, a percentage will definitely follow his words. But other than that, people would have to choose between two alliances. So I think there has been tremendous pressure on Mr. Rajinikanth from political parties, from ideologues, from advisors, etc. And those people want him to have some sort of political influence in the Tamil Nadu elections, even perhaps if Rajinikanth does not want to stay away. So I do agree with Mr. Ram's assessment that, look, there have been multiple issues as far as Rajinikanth is concerned. He had projected himself as an alternative for both Dravidian forces, which is the AIADMK and the DMK. Yeah. But what if eventually he was forced to go into an alliance with the AIADMK and the BJP? What if he had to form a third front and couldn't sustain it? So Rajinikanth would have had multiple doubts in his mind, but the health issue really cemented this decision for him. And I think it's now time for everyone to just let Mr. Rajinikanth be and not request him or ask him to give his political opinion, because again puts him in a fix, right?
Yeah. Well said. Thank you very much. And here's wishing him good health and speedy recovery in 2021. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on this discussion. We're stopping for a short break at this moment, but when we come back, from the virus to the vaccine via a new strain, what exactly is the thought process of the government and the action plan of 2021? We are going to speak to the principal scientific advisor to the government, Professor K. Vijayaraghavan. That exclusive interview coming right up. So 2020 has been the year of the coronavirus, but will 2021 be the year of the vaccine? The planning of the pandemic and beyond. It's a mammoth crisis and a mammoth task as well. And what exactly is the government's action plan? We are now about to interview a person who is the troubleshooter, who is the one who plans along with other representatives and functionaries of the government, Professor K. Vijayaraghavan, the principal scientific advisor. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us right here on NDTV. Now, the most important question, Professor Vijayaraghavan, is when is the vaccine coming? Now, I'm sure you've been asked this question a number of times. And I also know the fact, Professor Vijayaraghavan, that that's a wrong question. You can't put a date on something which will be, of course, there's an agency which is going to provide this answer. So my question to you will be different. My question is, what steps are left for India to roll out the vaccine? And by when will those steps be completed?
Thank you very much. Those steps which need to be done deal principally with three structures. One is the Central Drug Safety Organization, the CDSO, headed by the Drug Controller General of India. They evaluate safety data and immunogenicity and efficacy data of the vaccine from India and abroad. Those assessments are in progress and will be completed very soon. By this year end, i.e. a few days from now, or early next year, that's early January. After the drug controller approves a vaccine, in parallel with that, actually, the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization will approve it for immunization in the national immunization programs, as will the Health Ministry enter into discussions on how to roll it out. So all three are happening in parallel. Once the drug controller gives the nod, things will go very fast. As the Prime Minister has said several times, these are matters which the decision about when to roll out a vaccine should be left to our regulatory agencies and their scientists to take a hard decision, and they will take it correctly very soon.
Correct. Now, Professor Vijayaraghavan, I know for a fact that you, along with others, have been planning the rollout of the vaccine for a very long time, even before these vaccines had completed their phase 2 or phase 1 or phase 3 trials. The government wanted that apparatus to be ready, right? In that context, I want to ask you, how are these dry runs going on as of this moment, which started, I think, yesterday?
Yeah. So the organizational structure which deals with the rolling out of the vaccine, the procurement and the rolling out, is a structure called NEGVAC, a National Expert Group on Vaccination. That's chaired by Dr. Vinod Paul and Mr. Rajesh Bhushan, the Health Secretary. they have put in place quite some time back detailed plans, which they over the last few months have actually structured it in a manner where that detail has mapped down to every single state and every single step. At the heart of this is a structure called CoWIN, which is a IT backbone which deals with the procurement, the stockpiling, the distribution of the vaccine, and also the vaccination itself and its feedback that we know whether people have been vaccinated, where have they been vaccinated, when have they been vaccinated, whether it's the first dose or second dose. So all this is in place. Now, when such a huge structure, which is similar and comparable only to our general election structure, when that's in place in a manner similar to the general elections, we also need to make sure that everything is working. That's why you need a dry run, and there's a checklist provided by the health ministry, and beneficiaries will be given dummy vaccines at different locations in each of 4 states, in districts in each of 4 states. That's Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Gujarat, and Punjab. And these people then will be routes by which we check whether the vaccinator, the office system, the feedback system, everything is in place. This is vital because the moment the vaccine is approved, then we can roll out and be sure that the entire system is working.
Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, it's very interesting that you mention technology and data and its use in the form of an app called CoWIN. I want to ask you, is this the first time something like this is being attempted for inoculating people, technology and its use of this kind? And while you were envisioning this, what were the envisioned advantages of using technology to its fullest potential? And as you are also aware, technology has a negative side also. So have you factored in those challenges? Leakage of information.
Yeah. So CoWIN is an entire IT backbone, not just any particular app. Now, for our large-scale childhood immunization programs and maternal immunization programs, for many years now, the health ministry has got a vaccine intelligence network in place. That's also an IT network. Now, what that does, and this is why an IT backend is necessary, is it makes sure that vaccines are kept at the right temperature, that they're diluted from manufacturing hubs to stockpiling to distribution. Everything is done properly. Every step has to be right. You cannot have a misstep and you're going to give billions of doses. So this is not a question of having technology or not, but linking technology with people and constant feedback so that you make sure the decisions are taken. So it's not something which is left to technology. There's a huge network of people which have been put in place without compromising our regular immunization program. All that is being tested out in a representative way in our dry run. So a combination of people and technology is what is there.
Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, those who are going to be vaccinated are also supposed to be in use of this technology. For instance, they will have to furnish data and only provided they furnish that data on an app, they will be entitled to get this vaccine eventually as part of phase 1 is what I have read. A very common concern here is going to be how will you reach out to people who do not have access to technology or do not have internet connection, do not have a phone?
No. The technology is not required for people to be vaccinated at all. All people need is a way by which they can be identified as having got the vaccine the first time, and therefore they get the second dose at the right time. There are multiple routes to identification, and those who have access to technology could use that. Those who have access to Aadhaar can use that. There are other ways of identification. It's agnostic to what method people identify. Nothing to worry on that.
And how will that be done? For instance, in the back of beyond of this country, as an individual who needs that vaccine but does not have access to technology. I'm sure you must have thought of this, Professor Raghavan. Yeah.
No. Not only, I've not thought of it, but it's not me who does this thinking. It's the health ministry and the enormous network which have done this for decades. They have, we have removed smallpox from the country, polio, maternal tetanus, and we have vaccinated children every year. This is an enormous network which keeps going again and again and keeps improving year by year. So on that layer of understanding and experience, they're doing something which is actually has similarities, but it's on a much larger scale of course. Never before in the world has any country of this size has the requirement to vaccinate so many people so rapidly. So, but we have a reassurance that we can reach anywhere, in the smallest locations, in the most difficult places. And that's been done for multiple vaccinations, and that'll be done here too.
Sure. Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, a question on these vaccine candidates that are under consideration. Assuming many get approved, right, because there are many such candidates, how is the government planning to decide who gets which vaccine?
Well, the first vaccines which will likely to come out will be rolled out in January. They are going to be also vaccines which are going to be available in very large doses. And this will be the situation in the first quarter. Other vaccines will also come up, and their dose requirements will, dose availabilities will ramp up. So the first quarter, we're not going to see an issue of multiple vaccines really. By the time the second quarter and the third come in, we're going to have multiple vaccines licensed and go, and the vaccination program will go ahead. One route is that people who have, of course, got the first dose, they're likely to get the second dose of the same vaccine. And vaccination programs can be tailored so that they're distributed, different vaccines are distributed across different states or regions or priority groups. Those are the kinds of logistical arrangements which will have to be made.
No, this is interesting, Professor Vijay Raghavan, because you mentioned about logistical arrangements. I'm sure you're aware, the world over, this is also a concern, where different vaccines have different cold chain requirements. So do we have all of that in place?
The vaccines typically, like for example, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine manufactured by Serum has a relatively modest cold chain requirement, which our vaccination program already has. But again, this has to be scaled enormously, and that will be scaled. Other vaccines have a lower temperature requirement, such as a -20 or a -70. And while many people have legitimately expressed concerns on that, I don't think that is an unsurmountable problem. And indeed, it's a solvable problem because we have an extraordinary infrastructure of cold chains for multiple other reasons also, ranging from our medical sector, from our research sector, and so on. And many private companies are stepping in that range. So as those vaccines which require a greater cold chain step in, I don't see that as a pretty big issue.
Okay.
What will happen in some of the most stringent ones is that those vaccines will go to specific centers and people will go there. Unlike the other vaccines which have a lower stringency of temperature requirements, where the vaccines will go to people. So this kind of a balancing is one way to deal with those.
Interesting. It's interesting. So that's how the slotting will be done of the vaccines. That the more demanding ones in terms of logistical planning will be available in a counter, and those that can go to the people will go to the people. Is that how it's been planned?
Well, that's one way of dealing with it, simply because even district hospitals, smaller hospitals can have very robust freezer setups available, and people can go there. And the other vaccines can go directly to people. But there's also ways by which carry-on packs, which have been developed globally and have been used in India for other purposes, where refrigeration can be dealt. Let's cross that bridge when we come to that about refrigeration requirements. But I don't see that as a big problem.
Sure. Professor Vijay Raghavan, one last question on the vaccines, and then I'm going to come to the new strain. You held a press conference about it also just a short while ago. Now, vaccine candidates like the Serum Institute, they say that they have doses in the millions that have been made and are ready, right? So the moment they get approval, they will be available. But what's our plan on getting the right amount of doses that we need? Because see, this institute or this company also has its commitments to COVAX countries to give a part of their vaccines to other countries as well.
It's important to keep in mind, again, our national commitment, reiterated by the Prime Minister, that India is a responsible vaccine manufacturer. It has both a Gavi, which is a major vaccine alliance. It's a Gavi recipient country, which means it gets vaccines at very much lower costs from abroad. But it's also a Gavi donor country, which means that it funds Gavi to support vaccination programs in countries which cannot afford it. So in this responsible role, India will do both. It will serve its own citizens and ensure that its manufacturing capability, which is one of the largest in the world, also serves the rest of the world. This is not a either-or situation. And we must keep in mind, as many people have said, that no one is safe till everyone is safe.
Yeah.
There's no point in having vaccinations in a secluded area. Vaccination has to be global in this pandemic.
Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, one word on the efficacy as far as this Oxford vaccine is concerned. There are claims that there is 95% efficacy, but even that has not been verified. Do you think this is what is keeping our regulators and studying more data before giving an approval?
Well, first of all, I would not second guess our regulators. Let them do their job. Now, the question about efficacy is a interesting one. Efficacy of a vaccine is measured when in trials it is compared with those who don't get the vaccine to see how much disease progression takes place. So when both control and vaccinated groups get exposed to the disease, do the vaccinated groups show much fewer severe disease symptoms or even mild symptoms? So that's sort of a very carefully constructed structure, because you take care of watching both placebo and vaccinated people very carefully. Now, in that situation, when efficacy is high, anywhere between 60 to 90, as we've seen in various vaccines, it's very likely that on the field where you are going to now vaccinate hundreds of millions, the effectiveness of a vaccine, which is how much it protects in the field, is likely to be substantial and absolutely sufficient.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, talk about this new strain. You held a press conference also today. Now, new mutations are spreading enough fear. You know that more than I do. Are these vaccines that are being considered or under consideration, are they going to cover these different mutations as well?
So right now, what the mutations which have led to these new strains, what they do is they cause, principally of interest to us, variations in something called the spike protein. The spike protein is a protein on the virus which attaches receptor on our cells and then enters the cells. So these new variants have got changes in the spike protein which allow them to bind better to the receptor, and also to entry into susceptible cells are easier, and that's why they cause greater transmission. But the spike protein is a very large zone, and the vaccines attack that entire region and not just the region where the changes have taken place. So from every estimate, there is no reason to worry that the vaccines will not be effective. Now, what's happening in the UK is that this strain has shot up in terms of frequency in the population, and also the numbers of cases have increased. So the UK has also already started its vaccination program. So the proof of this assertion that the new variants will not affect vaccination will be seen very, very soon in a setting like the UK.
Yeah. Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan, just a quick addition to that question. If vaccines are fine and they cover a large variety of mutations, then why is this, this big worry globally? Why are we worried about the mutation? Because the virus is known to mutate. It will keep mutating. And secondly, a very, very important question that came in from a viewer, that if a person has recovered from COVID-19, should he or she be worried of this new mutation? Or will the antibodies take care of this new mutation as well?
Okay, both are very important questions. Let me be very brief about the first point. If you look at the virus's genetic material, then random changes occur as it propagates throughout the world. Most of these changes are entirely meaningless to the virus or to us. They just are useful for tracing the path of the virus, because you see where the mutations are prevalent in space and time. But some mutations, as you have seen in the UK variant or in the South Africa variant, can cause increased transmissibility. Now, they will not, these are matters of general concern, because what happens in the UK can happen anywhere else in the world, or what has happened in South Africa can happen anywhere else in the world. There are very, very large areas across the world, the US, India, all of Europe, in Africa, where there is free range for the virus to mutate. If by some chance a mutation occurs in any of these regions, which increase transmissibility or severity of disease, or even, unfortunately, such a large number of mutations which prevent the vaccines from acting, we could be in a matter of serious concern. That's why we must sequence a very large number of samples, both from passengers coming in internationally and within our population, to make sure that we understand where changes are taking place. And that's a major effort which the government and its scientific agencies and scientists have embarked on.
And that process has already begun. I heard the government saying that in the press conference. Now, Professor Vijay Raghavan.
Just the second point.
Sure.
Asked, if one has recovered from, one strain, are you protected against the, UK variant? Now, as I said, the antibodies against the, which the body raises, are in many ways similar to what the vaccine raises, except the vaccine does a much more controlled and usually much more efficient job. There's a lot of variation in people in terms of their response. Some people might have a mild response, some people might have a strong response. And remember that this UK variant, while it transmits more, it doesn't seem to cause a more severe disease. So it's moot about the sequence of the UK variant and other ones, whether you will get reinfected or not. It's very unlikely people get reinfected. There are some rare examples where they could have been reinfected, but in general, reinfection doesn't seem to be a big problem.
Okay. I think that will come as a huge relief. Your words are going to come as a huge relief for everyone, but of course, precaution has to be taken. Two quick questions before I wrap up this interview. One is on re-immunization. See, we know that viruses have a tendency to mutate. Something as common as influenza, like the common flu, it keeps mutating, and then you have to keep updating or upgrading the vaccine year after year. Do you see something similar happening for COVID-19 also, which means one jab is not going to be enough?
We don't know yet, but typically for many viruses, particularly respiratory viruses, year on year, it can happen that the following year's variant is vaccine recalcitrant compared to the previous year, or at least less so, as happens with influenza. In that situation, we are now actually very well prepared for continually looking at that and responding to that. As I said, in the early phase, vaccines are going to be in short supply. Later on, they're going to be available in wide levels. And after that, we enter a continuum phase where this kind of monitoring will take place. And, we can keep looking at the virus and keep tweaking vaccines if needed, so that they can deal with any incoming change, which is recalcitrant to the previous year's vaccine. We don't know that yet about this.
Correct. A lot of things that are unknown about this virus. My final question, and I've saved this one for the last, Professor Vijay Raghavan, because I saw a tweet of yours, and this is a very interesting tweet based on a write-up that you have written. You say that we have to get science closer to the people, and this trend has to be irreversible. It has to continue. Can you put this, this comment of yours in context? Why do you feel so, more so now?
Well, there are three parts to this. One, people today want not only the fruits of research, but they want research also. And they want, secondly, research to be speedy and, benefit them. So these are two very good aspects. The third aspect is scientists have for long said that invest in science and the payoff will come in due course. But today, we have seen that this large investment over many, many decades has paid off enormously in terms of application of science to the good of people. Now, are there ways going ahead by which we can make this happen a lot more? Science does take a long time for returns to come in, so investment for the long term is necessary. Simultaneously, you need another component of science which deals with our issues on a day-to-day, week-to-week, or month or yearly basis. Is that also simultaneously possible? And I think this year has shown a very positive side of how that actually can happen. We need to invest in that and have that compact between science and people robustly put together forever.
Well, here's to more science and more research. Professor K. Vijayaraghavan, thank you so much for joining us in this very, very candid conversation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.